Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 13 quarterfinals recap. No need for power rankings. We are in it to win it. Lose and you're out. It's playoffs time, baby. I'm IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. And as always, I'm joined by SteveChuck, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Hey, everybody.
With 4 matches to go into, we're just going to go through each match and talk a little bit more in depth about them and what happened, with one exception. Of course, still got a match good enough for the feature match. We'll talk about that whenever we get there. But for now, let's just talk about the first match that happened. And oh boy, we are starting off hot with the Bouffalant and the Agrons, the 3 versus the 6. But unfortunately for our many Agrons fans out there, this one fell the same way as the last about 7 or so, with the Bouffalant taking a big win. This one was a 6-0 playoff blowout. The Agrons' dedicated Rotom fan strats were for naught. Well, I guess you can lead Meowscarada, knock off Fortress's helmet, about the only item that would at least do something there. Out into Pincurchin, you fool, you boosted Volt Switch's power, but eject button again, this time out into Cloyster instead. Not sure if Joey knew that interaction, but the Shell Boys facing off. Terra Electric, Shell Smash, very interesting as Fori at least breaks potential Sash, doing over a third. Not sure if this will KO, but Rock Blast, miss. Unfortunate. Does not begin to describe this series. Well, Sneasel can only be out for one reason. It's a Scarf. Goodbye, Cloyster. Iron Moth is in next with a Quark Drive boosting special attack. Energy Ball into Slowking Real Specs too. Jeez. Meow and Fori again. U-turn out and Volt Switch out of Pincurchin. Sandy Shock's in. Swap to Cryo Volt Switch again into Excalibur. Into Pelipper, which cannot tank 2 Glaive Rushes. Another KO for the Bouffalant. Back into Iron Moth, but that's outsped by Bax, the second Scarf. With Meow back into Low Kick, that's the Agrons' Scarf. Low Kick does nothing to Sneasel. 2 close combats from Sneasel will KO Pincurchin at -2. It's back into Fortress. Survives 2 low kicks to go back into Sneasel. The Electric Train boosting the last Volt Switch enough to give that CC enough to KO the Meow after avoiding a crit. And Cryo goes down to the last CC, giving the Tier 5 4 KOs in a playoff match, and finishing the clean sweep for the Bouffalant. Pretty standard and straightforward here. We're going to start off talking about the matchup and prep and some stellar sets that we thought were very good. Not that much to talk about here, Steve, but a couple, I think, clear standouts, yeah?
Yeah, I'll start off with the Agrons here, who it's a little harder to find some standouts. They definitely showed a lot of prep for the Rotom, and especially the Hippo that did so well against them during the regular season. But with neither of them coming, their team was kind of left scrambling to answer the problems before them, and kind of result in this big swing 6-0 victory for the Bouffalant. On terms of the Bouffalant, they definitely showed up ready, definitely ready for like the Agron setup, bringing 4 Scarfs ready to outspeed the Shell Smash Cloyster, potentially speed boosting Iron Moth, all sorts of things that could be handled by various +1 speed Mons on the Bouffalant side, thanks to their choice Scarfs. One more interesting thing we talked about during the burn there, but the Pincurchin with eject button, a nice way to get Cloyster in safely with the electric terrain, able to kind of use his seemed dedicated Terramon and hopefully get something out of it. However, it did not end up working out this time.
Yeah, I do want to give a shout out to the Scarf Meowscarada too. That was about the one way that all my Scarfs could go wrong. Meowscarada outspeeds everything naturally, so with the Scarf, it outspeeds the Scarfs. Didn't quite come to fruition with the KO. Didn't really have support, but still of note. I talked about Terra there too with Cloyster. Not too much to talk about with Terra again here too, because Terra was burned here pretty early, and I never used it, but talked to us a little bit about how Terra may have shaped the matchup here.
Yeah, the Terra Electric on Cloyster, there are a couple things I could have done. Could have been to avoid potential paralysis from maybe like a Rotom discharge. Also allows for setting up there. Against the Fortress specifically, did get rid of the Ice typing, so Body Press was doing less, as well as Volt Switch, turning into a resist. So in general, a decent Terra option to get that Shell Smash. Potentially brings Terra Blast as a way to hit Slowking better. Unsure as we didn't see it. But yeah, just... it seemed like a reasonable choice. None of the other Mons that were going Cryo could have potentially been a pretty good Terramon, but nothing else really stood out as a big Terra abuser that was missing it, so it worked out. And yeah, in terms of the Bouffalant, no need. Only 2 Mons brought that were legal to Terra, being the Fortress and the Sneasel. And the Sneasel's typing was pretty important to stay the same to prevent the Meowscarada from going on a tear with its fighting moves. So really no need on the Bouffalant side to go for that Terra.
Yeah, I was kind of scared of Cryo potentially having a nice Terra type there, maybe with Iron Defense too. Ooh, that could have been a little creepy there to deal with, but we made it through. Agrons, 6-0, not good. What all went wrong? What can we boil that down to?
There are a couple things. The big thing to begin with is just the prep. Prepping big for Mons that didn't show up. That is a pretty big disadvantage from the get-go. And, if you were looking at the actual battle itself, a Rock Blast into Sneasler outspeeding and KOing Cloyster really kind of was the 1-2 punch of, oh, this is not going to go well. The Rock Blast missing might not have mattered too much. The damage on Fortress may have made it so that the Fortress went down later in the game, but that's a difference between a 5-0 and a 6-0, and not really too notable. So yeah, really just being outplayed throughout the whole thing.
And then, of course, we have a few things that went absolutely correct for the Bouffalant. It's 6-0. There's usually one tipping point or two tipping points. It wasn't necessarily a big old sweep, just a couple different moments there. So what are the couple things that really stood out for this game that were the tipping points that brought the Bouffalant this victory?
The big one was when already up, and Iron Moth comes in to revenge the Baxcalibur, thinking it's going to get a chance to launch off a Choice Specs boosted attack. Baxcalibur reveals it does in fact have the Scarf, goes for a third Glaive Rush, and KOs the Iron Moth from full, just like that. Big tipping point where, the Aggron's big offense that was left was taken out, and then is trying to pick the pieces back together with the Scarf, Meowscarada, and a little bit of support from Cryo and Pincurchin.
They're going to be able to at least call that that the Meowscarada with Scarf there. Saved me another couple of mons there too. Maybe one crit on a low kick could have even swayed it his way too. I could even potentially say that the last turn the Meowscarada was in, if the low kick had crit, could have gotten something together, but it did not. And relatively straightforward. Bouffalant move on to the semifinals. And we'll talk about who they face a little bit later. We have to see the results of all the matches because of some potential reseeding, if not all the matches go the way you expect. Speaking of, I think we're just going to move on to the next match here. We're going to go off to Route 1, where the Burbs, after being near the bottom of our playoffs power rankings, are the number 2 seed, hosting the sputtering 7-seeded Newport Noctrowls, in what we would expect, based on historical precedents, to be the best, closest match. However, and only one more turn than the previous match. It was a convincing 4-0 win for the Noctows. Very impressive. The lead Lycanroc gets off rocks for free on the Orthworm switch, then taunts to prevent rocks, but it's the body press to bring it down to Sash. Orthworm poised to pop off again against the Noctows, but no, it's Endeavor from Lycanroc, bringing Orthworm down to 1 as it goes down. Perfectly executed lead Lycanroc from Jimmy, which lets Arcanine get the revenge KO easily. Lone Muck comes in, knocks off AV from Goodra, then they trade some damage for Arcanine with Intimidate comes in to take a hit. Torkoal in next. Without boots and with the stun boosting Flamethrower, it takes a lot. Roaring Moon in with the attack Proto Boost to get a free Outrage. Hoodra is sacked. That leads to probably the most important play. We're talking about already. Great job from Jimmy to take advantage of Outrage with his Fairy type. What Fairy type? Vaporeon in. Terra Fairy, Immune Outrage, Terra Blast, Fairy Pack, gone. Great play. Muck in, Arcanine switch, substitute. That's not accomplishing much, and Torkoal is sacked with only one turn of Sun left. Walking Wake with a special attack boost, but one turn of Sun. Vaporeon keeps Water Absorb, Easy Wall, and it can chunk that Muck too on the follow-up. It'll Terra Steel with Poison Jab, but the Noctowls played it safe, swapping into Ursulina to easily tank that. Proc the Burn. Facade will destroy the Walking Wake that switches in into Slitherwing is the last chance. Wild Charge could do a ton to Vaporeon, or the Tornado's coming in, but Jimmy stayed in this time to finish it off with another Facade. One last EQ to take care of Muck. The Paradox teams are both out now with the Burbs. A respectable finish, but it's the Noctowls knocking out the back-to-back-to-back finalist in the Season 12 Finals rematch. We're going to go back to it again. Some nice prep here from especially the Noctowls. Some really interesting sets brought here. Some that worked, some that really didn't. Talk to us a little bit about the matchup prep and some sets, Steve.
Yeah, starting off with the Noctowls, really would like to focus on that lead Lycanroc. Making sure you got that dedicated rocker against the Torkoal and the Sun team, trying to get that 25% every time it comes in. Sure, you can set up the Sun, but every time you do, it's going to cost you a lot of health on that Torkoal, who will get worn down and kind of limit the effectiveness of the Sun. And then, of course, not only doing that, but then with Endeavor and Focus Sash, being able to trade its life as a suicide lead for basically all of Orthworms was a huge plus and really set the tone in the Noctowls' favor. And even then with the Sun, the Arcanine, fantastic set here. Flamethrower honestly just did a ton, especially with the Sun boost a lot of times. There were plenty of answers to it, but the answers were, Walking Wake and Roaring Moon, which were kind of more selective breakers or sweepers on the Burb side. So Arcanine coming in quite frequently with the Flamethrower was really able to do a lot of work. On the side of the Burbs, a little bit of an interesting thing that their Tier 2s really didn't show up this match. No Screamtail, of course, which a little bit understandable. Outsped by a Tornadus, which could taunt it. Really doesn't like the matchup against other top tiers in general. Ursaluna just kind of breaks through it. The Hisuian Goodra has that Steel-type attack to really break through it. It's not a great matchup, so it doesn't show up. And then the Moth really didn't do anything here either. Slitherwing just came out towards the end, Slitherwinged into a ground type, hoping for a switch, and died. So a little bit of a disappointment there, and that kind of was just the entire battle for the Burbs.
A couple other sets I think are pretty notable. The Ursaluna here with the burn for the Flame Orb seems relatively standard. I know a few people who will swear by something like Assault Vest. I think the Gut set is a little overrated. But taking a look at how tanky the Burb side was, something like Screamtail that could have very well have shown up, as well as the Orthworm that Jimmy had trouble with the first time around. There have been other shouts to the Lycanroc set, but getting that Guts boost on something like Fire Punch or Hammer Arm to be able to hit the Orthworm, as well as probably Facade to be able to smack that Screamtail, maybe one of his only options to be able to 2-hit KO that, I think very valuable. And of course, as we transition into Terra, boy, did that Vaporeon set come through big. Talk to us about the threat of Terra from the Noctowls, as well as what the Burbs did with it.
Yes, so from the Noctowls, that Vaporeon was definitely the shining example of a great Terra use here. Terra Fairy Vaporeon against this team with 2 dragons as the tier 1s, being able to resist or be immune to the stabs of all tier 1s and 2s brought by the opposing team. Dark and Dragon from Roaring Moon, Water and Dragon from the Wake, and as well as Bug Fighting from Slitherwing. So just a great defensive option, as well as giving them that offensive Terra Blast, which is great into this team in general as well. Just a great Mon, able to sit there, take big hits for usually nothing, and hit back, and definitely was the key piece to win them this game. On the side of the Burbs, they ended up going with Terra Steel Muck towards the end. It was in an effort kind of to catch Vaporeon off guard, live a Terra Blast, and pick up a KO. The Noctowls were able to switch out of that. Really wasn't too meaningful of the Burbs. They just were kind of too far behind and weren't able to really get an effective use out of Terra. Not able to pull anything crazy out with it this time.
Speaking of, Burbs fell apart, looks like relatively early, somewhere in the mid-game as well. What ended up going wrong for the Burbs in the match?
I mean, I might point to really early on, maybe as soon as the Endeavor takes out their Orthworm, which was a, potentially key defensive piece to have in the back. Just losing all of that health instantly, basically losing them on, really set them back and required some additional switching and replanning for the physical attackers.
And if you'll recall, too, the last time that Orthworm faced the Burbs, or faced off against the Noctowls, Orthworm was the one that took Vaporeon down super low, basically 1v1'd that for just about a couple times, and having that go down immediately, especially with the threat of Iron Head on that Terra Fairy. Ooh, Terra Fairy Vaporeon went in. Speaking of, I think it's pretty obvious what probably the number one key moment is of the match. That Vaporeon, that turn where it could just take out Roaring Moon for free, was pretty great. Anything else that you would like to highlight as key moments as to what led to the Noctowls' victory?
Another key moment I'll highlight soon after the Vaporeon Terra Fairies is Torkoal coming in and just going down with 1 turn of Sun left, only getting that 1 set of Sun turns to really try and do something with, and for a team with so many abilities based on the Sun, having so little time to effectively utilize them, kind of led to the results we're seeing of the 4-0.
Outstanding, and that is, of course, last season's finals rematch here, going the way of the Noctowls, who will join the Bouffalant in semifinals. But who else is going to be there? Well, speaking of rematches, we've got the number 4 seed versus the number 5 seed. It's a rematch, the Corviknight Clobbers and the Waterdeep Wobbuffets. But it's another new result. This time the Palafin-led Clobbers got cooked by the Wobbuffets 3-0. Turn 1 into Enamorous on Garchomp's EQ. Then Moonblast into Glowbro does a surprising amount of damage. Sludge Bomb does nothing back on its brother Glowking, which means it gets Future Sight off into the Garchomp. Back into Enamorous on Spikes. Well, now what? Moonblast actually does half to Talonflame, with Future Sight finishing off the clincher from the first time around. That's a good sign for Steve early. Amoonguss is out, but Magnezone has the safety goggles. Reflect on the Jolteon switch, but it's going to Calm Mind twice on the Glowking switch, which gets some damage off before Terra Ghost Shadow Ball takes out the Glowking easy. However, Scarf Indeedee, Psyshock hits the physical size of down goes Jolteon. Psyshock is good damage into Glowbro, but Sludge Bomb does get the poison back. Slack off on Magnezone switch, then Volt switch out to Enamorous on the Calm Mind, but even at +1 special defense, Earth Power does not have any resist or immunities left, so down goes the Glowbro. back to Amoonguss and swap to Palafin to get that activated, doubling to Garchomp with Rocks against Reflect. Magnezone with a great prediction of Garchomp. Flash Cannon doing over half with Analytic, then Terra Grass to survive a hit, swapping to Palafin, who tanks the second Flash Cannon. Then on the next turn, will Ice Punch to take out the Magnet. Indeed, sets Terrain, Psychic KOs Garchomp, but it comes to Poison. Electrode and Palafin on the blind double. Great Volt Switch out from the Amoonguss switch. So Armarouge with Expanding Force will finish off the Palafin, switching back in, and the Amoonguss. Great maneuvering from the Wobbuffets, especially in that mid-game, to get their revenge against the Clobberers. 3-0. Revenge match went a little bit differently here for you this time, Steve. Talk to us about the matchup prep and some sets that stood out for you from both sides.
Yeah, so I'll start by talking about the Clobberers. Looking at their team afterwards against a kind of Psychic Terrain team, there's a big question, and is where is their one Psychic resist of Klefki? Of course, Psychic Terrain does kind of limit the hindrance ability of Klefki with things like Thunder Wave. However, still able to set screens, and was a pretty big problem for the Wobbuffets the first time with the continuous screen support. So a little bit of a question there. Something else with the Clobberers set, this was something from their previous matchup as well, was Amoonguss with the red card. The Wobbuffets definitely have a lot of mons that they have used as setup sweepers, especially those tiers 2s of Armarouge and Enamorus. However, last time, Amoonguss did quite enough using Clear Smog to assist there, and there's definitely other answers to Armarouge as well. So the red card may have been just a little bit extra too cute, and ended up backfiring in the battle with the red card switching in the Amoonguss answer into it, which definitely helps the Wobbuffets maintain momentum in the late game. On the Wobbuffet side, me being the Wobbuffets, I'll say I liked my decision to not bring Galarian Zapdos here. In the previous match, it just lost to Talonflame, being faster, with investment bulky enough to survive attacks and then burn back and slowly whittle it down while healing with Roost. Kind of completely walled it. So nice to see that I learned from that and didn't need to bring it this time. It might have been a poor choice on my part to bring so many electrics into a team with so many immunities, but that really just speaks to how big of a priority Palafin was, with both Magnezone and Hisuian Electrode, both of them with their electric attacks, looking at the Amoonguss, looking at Jolteon, looking at Garchomp, but definitely worth it to threaten the Palafin and really apply pressure there.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense with no Gyaptos there, why Talonflame was sacked so early as well. Big shout out to the Scarfon and DD there too, got a nice revenge KO against a boosting threat. So even if that looks like a kind of small decision, boy, that ended up paying well. A couple of Calm Minders there that could have gone out of control, but they did not. One of them, of course, was the Terramon for the Clobberers. Talk to us a little bit about the Terra possibilities and what actually went through with them in the match.
Yeah, so the Terra Ghost Jolteon was a really nice choice. The Calm Mind is definitely worth highlighting here. Getting the couple boost, especially without the physical attackers. Jolteon also naturally outspeeds the physical attackers, most notably the main one for the Wobbuffets being that Gyapdos, which Jolteon would very easily threaten with electric moves. So getting that special bulk to live against everything else. Terra Ghost was brought to provide a immunity to Body Press for Magnezone, allowing for better setup opportunities against it. Would therefore pretty much completely wall Magnezone, which in this case it did. Also had the benefit of powering up Shadow Ball, which would have been a nice coverage move, especially for something like maybe the Donphan that didn't show up. However, definitely backfired as something like a Terra Dark, so that all the Psychic spam couldn't get to it, notably the Scarf Size Shock, would have been more useful in this case. But that is just what the team ended up being. On the term for the Wobbuffets, Grass Magnezone is a pretty obvious Terra here, able to use its fantastic defense to better live Palafin hits, as well as turn that nasty weakness to ground and Garchomp into a resist. It didn't really matter too much in this match. Magnezone got pretty worn down by hazards before it ended up tearing, just trying to get a live a hit against Garchomp and KO it. However, that was on a switch and then ended up going down anyways. Not really notable, but it was more of a get more ahead move from the Wobbuffets and not something they needed to secure the game in this matchup.
So what exactly do you think went wrong for the Clobberers here? There were a couple things that I think they did very well, right? The Jolteon set, I think, was pretty great. Garchomp, while it didn't really get damage off, was able to get hazards, which stacks up over time. But where did this all fall apart for them?
before, I think the big moment it fell apart was not getting Palafin in until the late game. It was turn 17 with 3 Mons already down that baby Palafin came in for the first time and then immediately switched out. That really limited their options, as up until that point, Palafin wasn't really a threat and could be kind of ignored. And it was until they really needed it that they started, that they brought in for the first time to get that option, giving the Wobbuffets lots of time to solidify their lead and get ahead.
Yeah, a ton of switching there in the mid game. If it were on the other side, where the Clobbers could have taken advantage of those hazards, maybe could have gone a different way. But as it is, the Wobbuffets walk away winners, and what are some of those big moments and big contributing factors to that win?
There were a couple of turns throughout the battle where it just became a position where it was pick a sack. Early on, I think it was like turn 5 or so, with the Future Sight coming in and a Specs Enamorous staring down the Garchomp, clicking Moonblast. Doesn't matter what you're switching in there between Future Sight and Moonblast, something's going down. Ended up being the Talonflame, which, considering the Gyarados wasn't here, very reasonable. But moments like that are just great to see. There was another one later on with the Enamorous clicking Earth Power. With the Talonflame gone, Earth Power is looking very good, and the Glowbro ends up going down there. But the moments like that, getting up to a big lead early, definitely made it look quite promising for the Wobbuffets.
And just a couple of big free turns from all that switching, like I said, being able to take advantage of the mons that were down, even at the very end when Garchomp is down, makes it very easy on the blind double to Volt Switch out of the Palafin, knowing that if Amogus comes in, it's not going to be immunity like Garchomp was, and you can set up for your end game. So a couple really nice plays, and the Waterdeep Wobbuffets will be joining us in the semifinals. So both of your co-hosts here in the semifinals. Last match here, we can't go into too much detail here because, boy, this was an awesome match. We have the 8 seed versus the 1 seed. It's the Cincinnati Incineroar that will surprise the surprise 1 seed Calgary Corviknights. I think we had a lean that this would be a really good match, but we had no idea. We'd get the 1-0 upset from the Incineroar. This really was an awesome match. Great win for Matt to make it to the semifinals over the number 1 seeded Corviknights. Again, without going into too much details here, Steve, there are a couple things you can glean from the end screen before we toss it over to the match of the week, folks. Maybe a different face there covering this matchup, but what can you tell us about the matchup to get us a little bit hyped to go watch in more detail?
This Moltres was definitely the key reason they won. We can see here the presence of agility and the Terra Ground, and I'll even drop a little hint that this is in fact an offensive Moltres. Well, the Incineroar have been favoring a defensive Moltres all season. This was definitely the right moment to bring the Terra Ground, agility, offensive Moltres, and what it was able to do throughout the match, and especially at the end to close out the game, is definitely worth checking out the match of the week.
Matt has done a great job with that Moltres, especially with Terra. We've seen a couple really cool options from it previously, but as you've said, it's generally been in a more defensive aspect. So what happened here in the offensive one? You got to check out the match of the week on this channel for the quarterfinals feature match. But that's all 4 of our quarterfinalists that won. We now just have the semifinals. And that is going to be, as shown here, only 1 match went as expected according to seeding. That was my very own Buffalo Bouffalant, who will now face off against the lowest remaining seed, the Cincinnati Incineroar, who toppled the 1 seed. So the 3 versus 8 here. And on the other side, the Wobbuffets with the win over the Clobbers and very closely seeded matchup. The 5 seed Wobbuffets against the number 7 seeded Newport Noctowls that beat the Burbs. Boy, these should be a lot of fun. We actually have a couple of rematches here, Steve, so our questions for these matchups will be related to that. For the Bouffalant and the Incineroar, Espathra and Haxorus are the new additions to the Incineroar since their Week 7 matchup against the Bouffalant here over the Salamence and the Rillaboom. Last time, Rillaboom played a big part in the last matchup, so this time Espathra is here, and that has been a key piece to the Incineroar's success. So how does Espathra being here and Rillaboom not being here affect both sides? I'll let you take the Incineroar while I take a bit of a take on the Bouffalant. What do you think?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Rillaboom was a key piece of their initial offense, kind of led to a little bit of a cat-and-mouse situation where Rillaboom really wanted to go off, but it kind of forced Sermons on the Bouffalant side to play a more major role, which forced the counter them to be better. It also kept a grassy terrain going on the battle for most of the match, making the Earthquake weaker, as well as providing passive recovery to walls. So the switch up to Espathra is definitely going to be a big difference. Espathra being a lot more of a win condition in general, We've definitely seen, especially in like week 8 of the regular season, the ability of Espathra to set up with Calm Minds and Speed Boost and Stored Power to tear through teams. As well as in this last match, Espathra revealed it does in fact know it can use Lumina Crash, a great move to catch a switch in, drop their special defense 2 stages, and then pick up an easy KO. Between all these options, Espathra is definitely something I would look for the Incineroar to bring and look for opportunities. There are certainly issues with it, especially with those just psychic moves I'm listing. Slowking seems like a very nice, especially defensive option that resists, something that would also like to just pivot out to heal afterwards. So definitely some hills to still climb, but definitely look for Espathra to play a big part in this upcoming match.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Slowking there. Slowking did not come the first time around, but that's probably the single mon that I would say is most affected by the Rillaboom compared to the Espathra, right? Rillaboom definitely tries to keep out that Slowking very effectively, as opposed to having something that can wall pretty easily. So that could be a pretty immediate, obvious change there. It looks like for the second straight season, we may also have some pressure on Wo-Chen in the matchup here too, right? Espathra, of course, it's the only psychic immunity that the Bouffalant have as their dark type, and I wonder how well it can wall this Espathra. As the Incineroar are getting more and more experience using Espathra, this is their second season using it. I wonder what kind of tricks we'll have up his sleeve to be able to handle something like a Wo-Chen, and how maybe the rest of the team is going to be involved to be able to break down those couple of possible resistances or immunities. Even some like Fortress, not really known for its offensive prowess, it's a resist to Psychic, but is it going to be good enough, especially without Rillaboom there that it needs to dedicated wall or check? Imagine if the Espathra just plays around the Fortress well, what's it actually doing? And can it even do enough to the Espathra if it does come? We've seen the Incineroar favor a very physically bulky set. Is a Fortress going to do anything to an Espathra like that, even without the ability to Terra? That could be a big deal. I definitely agree, Espathra seems to be a focal point of this matchup, even as a new mon introduced into the matchup. And we're really looking for those differences between the first and second matchup, right? Often we talk about how difficult it is to win the follow-up match after you've matched. Shown a lot of tricks, but boy, the Incineroar have even more. It'll be a little tricky, I think, for the Bouffalant to stay ahead of what the Incineroar could be cooking. And for our other matchup here, Wobbuffets Noctowl. This is a rematch from Week 5, right after they both fought against the Bouffalant as well. Last time was a win for the Noctowls, until it wasn't. If you'll recall, back in Week 5, this was the Endure set from the Wobbuffets on Armor Rouge that just kind of obliterated the Noctowls after they did not bring the Sucker Punch on low kicks or any other form of priority aside from the first impression, which Endure handled perfectly, and Armor Rouge ended up getting a sweep. Is playing once before the biggest factor in this matchup, as we've said many times before, or is it the new additions to the Noctowls, or is it something else entirely?
Yeah, this is definitely a unique match. As you mentioned, typically we would kind of favor the person who lost the previous match because they've seen the opponent's winning strategy and can counter it. However, the winning strategy of the Wobbuffets was Endure Armor Rouge, which is a little bit kind of a little more on the meme side. It is still quite good, but it was definitely a matchup that it felt like the Noctowls were winning, and then just one set prevented that. So now the Wobbuffets have a great chance, knowing what their opponent has done previously, to try and adjust. However, as you mentioned, and a very key part of this matchup is all of the new mons on the side of the Noctowls. Adding mons like Tornadus Therian, Toxtricity, Arcanine, Lycanroc Midday, and Drifloon. A ton of new faces for the matchup, which can really change how this is going to play out. There were some key moments in the last game. I specifically remember the Houndstone was a very big wall that kind of just shut down the Gyapdos set. However, without that, and the replacements being like Drifloon or Tornadus, well, they both handle the fighting well. They don't have really the physical defense to handle the flying stab quite as well. So a little bit of a question mark there on how maybe Gyapdos will be able to play a bigger picture. But the teams did play long enough ago that I think the bigger factor is definitely going to be just all the new mons and how the matchup adjusts as such.
I think I mostly agree with that. I would say it really comes down to prep, which obviously with a very new matchup is going to mean a lot, or that's going to be a big part of the difference in prep. I think of the semifinals, I was most impressed with the Noctowl's prep, and it sure looks like he's on track to do one of these miracle seasons, right? You end up as a terrible seeding from the regular season, and then you just turned on for the playoffs. I think we call that the Steamroller Special, or perhaps the Burb Special, whichever one of those trademarked it first. It's going to come down to how we see the Noctills use some of these new mons. Tornadus Therian, just as an example, it's been on his team since Week 8. Week 8 was a meme match, and then in the quarterfinals, it didn't even hit the field. What are the Noctills cooking with Tornadus Therian? I think that's kind of a tall task for the Wobbuffets to figure out exactly what it wants to do in this matchup. It's lost a lot of tools, but it is still good in many ways. What is he potentially cooking with the Arcanine? What if the Arcanine or something like this comes? We've seen a couple different successful sets, but that doesn't necessarily mean everything. I do think the onus is going to be on the Wobbuffets this time to figure out what the new mons do. And as you said, normally we would say the other way around. Oh, this team won. Now you have to figure out how you adjust. But really, it's a lot of this is the new mons. What are they going to do? And getting a step ahead of that in prep, bringing the right sets is really tough. The second time around, but even more so, I think, with the mix of old and new, this should be absolutely a blast to watch, as should the other one, and make sure that you come back here next week so you can see the results of those, and see what we might cook up for the finals. We're going to figure out what we're doing here. Boy, if we have to have an all-finals matchup where we tear each other apart before the finals, we'll do that, or maybe we'll be fortunate enough for us to both lose and have another unique matchup in the finals. We'll see whenever that happens. Enjoy the semifinals for whenever they come out. We'll see you next time.